5:30 a.m., Pinehurst Golf Resort. Dense morning mist clung to the manicured greens like a velvet shroud, swallowing the world in ethereal silence. Ryan O'Sullivan moved through this ghostly landscape when something shattered his tranquil routine. Through the pearl-white fog, three men in charcoal suits materialized like shadows, dragging a woman toward a gleaming black SUV. Her designer heels scraped desperately against rain-slicked asphalt, each sound cutting through the morning stillness. Disheveled auburn hair framed a face etched with raw terror, her silk blouse torn at the shoulder. But it was her eyes that froze him mid-step. Wild, desperate, they found his through the vehicle's tinted glass as trembling fingers pressed against the window. Her lips formed silent words he couldn't hear but understood with chilling clarity. The SUV's engine growled to life, taillights disappearing into the morning's embrace, leaving only black tire marks and the haunting echo of something Ryan hadn't felt in 2 long years. As he stood there, garden hose forgotten in his grip, one thought seared through his consciousness. I should have done something. 24 months earlier, rain had hammered against the windshield of Ryan's pickup truck with relentless fury. Emma's laughter filled the cab as she reached across to adjust the radio, her wedding ring catching the dashboard light. "Slow down, cowboy," she'd teased, but Ryan's hands had been steady on the wheel, his confidence unshakable. Until the deer appeared from nowhere and physics took over where love couldn't follow, the subsequent silence had been deafening. No more laughter, no more gentle corrections, just the mechanical beeping of hospital monitors and the weight of a choice that would haunt him forever. Now, 2 years later, Ryan lived in a different kind of silence, one filled with the ghost of what he'd lost and the constant reminder of what he'd failed to protect. The trailer park where Ryan and his 9-year-old daughter Lily called home sat on the forgotten edge of Pinehurst, where the American dream wore thin at the edges. Each morning at 4:15, Ryan's alarm clock shattered the pre-dawn darkness with mechanical precision. He'd kissed Lily's forehead as she slept, her small frame barely making a dent in the narrow bed they'd bought second-hand from a church sale. The drive to Pinehurst Golf Resort took exactly 12 minutes, long enough for Ryan to compartmentalize his grief into manageable pieces. His uniform consisted of weathered work boots, a faded flannel shirt, and a baseball cap that had seen better decades. The country club members looked through him as if he were part of the landscape, convenient, necessary, but ultimately invisible. The woman appeared 3 days after the incident, checking into the resort's most expensive suite with the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to luxury. Victoria Sterling, according to the guest registry, claimed to be a real estate CEO from Charlotte. Her tailored business attire and polished demeanor suggested success, but Ryan noticed the way her eyes constantly swept the surroundings, cataloging exits and escape routes, with the unconscious efficiency of someone who'd learned to always be ready to run. When she approached him near the irrigation system, her voice carried a careful neutrality that couldn't quite mask an underlying tension. "Excuse me, could you tell me about the town? I'm considering some business opportunities here." The question seemed innocent enough, but something in her tone suggested she was fishing for information far more personal than commercial real estate prospects. Their first real conversation happened on a Tuesday morning when the sprinkler system decided to stage a mechanical rebellion. Ryan was elbow-deep in copper pipes and electrical connections when Victoria appeared with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You look like you could use this," she said, settling onto the damp grass beside him with a casualness that seemed at odds with her expensive clothing. They talked about ordinary things: the weather, the town's history, the peculiar habits of golf course maintenance. Ryan found himself sharing stories about Lily, carefully omitting the darker chapters of their recent history. Victoria listened with an intensity that felt almost therapeutic, as if she were absorbing his words to fill some hollow space inside herself. When she mentioned that she might need help with something unspecified, Ryan felt a familiar stirring in his chest, the same protective instinct that had once made him a formidable Navy SEAL. The harassment incident occurred during the resort's monthly charity gala, where the local elite gathered to congratulate themselves on their generosity while consuming salmon that cost more than Ryan's weekly salary. Victoria attended in a stunning black dress that transformed her from businesswoman to knockout. But the attention she attracted wasn't entirely welcome. Daniel Whitman, a trust fund baby with a reputation for pushing boundaries, had cornered her near the putting green, with the persistence of someone who'd never been told no. Ryan witnessed the exchange from across the patio, seeing Victoria's polite smile falter as Whitman's advances became more aggressive. Without conscious thought, Ryan approached with a maintenance clipboard in hand. "Excuse me, ma'am, but you wanted to inspect the irrigation system?" The interruption was perfectly timed, giving Victoria an escape route while allowing both of them to maintain their dignity. As they walked toward the equipment shed, Victoria's hand briefly touched his arm. "Thank you," she whispered, and Ryan felt something shift in the careful distance they'd maintained. The bullying incident at Lily's school came to a head on a Thursday afternoon when Ryan arrived to find his daughter sitting alone on the playground, her small shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. The other children had been cruel in the way that only children can be, targeting her second-hand clothes and her father's lowly profession with surgical precision. "They said you're just a gardener," Lily whispered against his chest, her voice muffled by tears and confusion. "They said their dads were important, and you're not." The words hit Ryan like physical blows, each one a reminder of how far he'd fallen from the man he'd once been. Victoria appeared at the school gate as if summoned by his despair, having stopped by to drop off some educational materials she'd mentioned earlier. She took one look at Lily's tear-stained face and immediately knelt down to child level. "You know what I think?" she said conspiratorially. "I think your dad is the most important person in this whole town. He takes care of everything that makes it beautiful." The storm that hit Pinehurst that Friday night was the kind that made weathermen giddy with excitement and residents nervous about their insurance premiums. Ryan received the emergency call at 11:30 p.m. The resort's main irrigation system had failed, and with a major tournament scheduled for the weekend, panic had set in among the management. He'd left Lily with their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, and driven through sheets of rain that turned the roads into rivers. The repair required crawling through flooded mechanical tunnels while lightning illuminated the sky like a cosmic strobe light. He was waist-deep in muddy water, fighting with stubborn electrical connections, when a second flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Victoria stood in the tunnel entrance, soaked to the skin but holding a heavy-duty flashlight with the determination of someone who'd decided to see this through. "You need better light," she said simply, as if standing in a flooded tunnel at midnight was perfectly normal behavior for a real estate CEO. They worked in companionable silence, Victoria holding the light steady while Ryan's hands performed the delicate surgery required to resurrect the irrigation system. The rain drummed against the tunnel opening, creating a cocoon of sound that seemed to isolate them from the rest of the world. When Victoria's fingers accidentally brushed his while passing him a tool, neither of them pulled away immediately. "I'm running from something," she said suddenly, her voice barely audible above the storm. The admission hung between them like a confession, raw and vulnerable. Ryan paused in his work, meeting her eyes in the flashlight's glow. "We all are," he replied quietly. "The question is whether we're running toward something better or just away from something worse." The electrical connection finally cooperated, and the system hummed back to life, but neither of them moved to leave their temporary sanctuary. Their growing connection was interrupted by a phone call that shattered Victoria's carefully constructed composure. Ryan had been replacing sprinkler heads near the resort's main building when he heard her voice through an open window, sharp with desperation. "I've told you already, I'm not coming back. I don't care what he says." The conversation continued in whispers too low to decipher, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable. When she emerged from the building moments later, her face was pale and her hands trembled as she lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Ryan approached cautiously, the way he might approach a wounded animal. "Everything okay?" he asked, though the answer was written in the tight lines around her eyes. Victoria's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Define okay," she said, taking a long drag from her cigarette. "My past has a way of catching up with me no matter how far I run." The revelation came in pieces, like a puzzle being assembled in reverse. Ryan's curiosity about Victoria's company had led him to a late-night internet search that revealed more questions than answers. Sterling Real Estate's website looked professional enough, but something about it felt hollow, like a movie set designed to look real from a distance. The executive photos were generic stock images, and the company's portfolio consisted of projects that seemed to exist only in carefully crafted press releases. When he confronted Victoria the next morning, she didn't deny his suspicions. Instead, she led him to a quiet corner of the resort's garden and began to unravel the fiction she'd constructed. "My real name is Victoria Sterling," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "But I'm not a CEO. I'm the daughter of Marcus Sterling, and my family's business has nothing to do with real estate." The Sterling name carried weight in certain circles, though not the kind that appeared in legitimate business magazines. Marcus Sterling had built an empire through carefully managed connections between legitimate businesses and less savory enterprises. Money laundering, protection rackets, and political corruption were the foundation of the Sterling fortune, though the family maintained a veneer of respectability that had protected them for decades. Victoria had grown up in this world, understanding from an early age that her father's love came with strings attached, specifically the expectation that she would marry whoever would best serve the family's interests. Marco Rossetti represented the next generation of organized crime, and their union would cement an alliance between two powerful families. The problem was that Victoria had other plans that involved disappearing into the kind of normal life that money couldn't buy. "I've been running for 5 years, Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger as she shed the weight of her deception. "I've changed my name, my appearance, my entire identity, but they always find me eventually. Marco won't give up, because this isn't about love. It's about power and territory, and things that matter more to him than my happiness." Ryan listened in silence, processing the implications of what she was telling him. The woman he'd been falling for was not just running from an unwanted marriage. She was fleeing from a world where people disappeared for disappointing the wrong person. "So you came to Pinehurst to hide?" he said finally. Victoria nodded, then shook her head. "I came here to hide," she corrected, "but I stayed because I found something worth staying for." The look she gave him was loaded with meaning, and Ryan felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with caring about someone he might lose. The black SUV appeared first in the resort's parking lot, its tinted windows and out-of-state plates immediately catching Ryan's attention. He'd developed a heightened awareness of such things during his military service, and something about the vehicle's presence felt wrong in the manicured tranquility of Pinehurst. The men who emerged wore expensive suits that couldn't quite disguise their predatory nature, and they moved with the purposeful confidence of people accustomed to getting what they wanted. Ryan watched from his position near the equipment shed as they approached the front desk, their questions about a specific guest answered with the kind of helpfulness that money could buy. By the time he'd pulled out his phone to warn Victoria, it was too late. The confrontation in the resort's lobby unfolded with the terrible inevitability of a natural disaster. Marco Rossetti was exactly what Ryan had expected. Handsome in a dangerous way, with the kind of charm that masked something fundamentally predatory. His expensive suit and polished shoes were armor against a world that had taught him to take what he wanted through force or intimidation. "Victoria, darling," he said loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear, his voice carrying across the marble floors like a challenge. "Your father is worried sick about you." The reunion wasn't romantic. It was a business transaction disguised as a family reconciliation. Victoria's resistance was fierce, but ultimately futile against three men who had no intention of taking no for an answer. The hotel staff watched with the studied blindness of people who understood that some situations were above their pay grade. As the SUV pulled away from the resort, Ryan felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once made him an effective warrior. The equipment shed, where Ryan stored his maintenance tools, also contained a military-grade footlocker that he hadn't opened in 2 years. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were the tools of his former trade: night vision goggles, tactical communications equipment, and a service pistol that had saved his life more times than he cared to remember. The familiar weight of the weapon in his hands brought back muscle memory that had never truly faded, along with the clarity of purpose that came with having a mission. He'd failed to protect Emma, but he wouldn't fail Victoria. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town was exactly where he'd expected them to go, isolated, defensible, and far enough from civilization that screams wouldn't carry. As he moved through the shadows surrounding the building, Ryan felt the old skills returning like a language he'd temporarily forgotten. The rescue operation unfolded with the methodical precision of a military exercise. Ryan's reconnaissance revealed 3 guards outside the warehouse, their positions predictable and their alertness compromised by overconfidence. Inside, he could hear Marco's voice alternating between cajolery and threats, while Victoria's responses remained defiant despite her obvious fear. "Your father just wants you to come home," Marco was saying, his tone suggesting that home was the last place any rational person would want to be. "And I want you to understand that this arrangement benefits everyone involved." Victoria's response was immediate and uncompromising. "I'd rather die than marry you." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Ryan knew that time was running out. The guards went down quietly, their unconscious forms dragged into the shadows with the efficiency of someone who'd performed similar operations in more hostile environments. The confrontation with Marco was everything Ryan had expected, and nothing he'd prepared for emotionally. Seeing Victoria tied to a chair, her face bruised but her spirit unbroken, triggered something primal in him that transcended training or strategy. "Let her go," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd given orders in life-or-death situations. Marco's laugh was genuinely amused. "The gardener wants to play hero? How refreshingly naive." The fight that followed was brief but vicious, with Marco's hired muscle proving no match for Ryan's military training. But it was Victoria who ended the confrontation, using the distraction of the fight to free herself and deliver a decisive blow to Marco's head with a conveniently placed wrench. The sound of sirens approaching in the distance suggested that someone had finally decided to involve the proper authorities. The FBI's involvement changed everything in ways that Ryan hadn't anticipated. Victoria's value as a witness against the Sterling organization meant that her testimony could dismantle decades of carefully constructed criminal enterprises. But it also meant that her life would never be safe, as long as the people she'd betrayed remained free. The Witness Protection Program offered security at the cost of identity, requiring Victoria to disappear completely from the life she'd been building in Pinehurst. "I have to go," she told Ryan as they sat in the FBI field office, her voice hollow with the weight of impending loss. "They can give me a new name, a new life, but they can't give me you." The choice she offered was impossible. Come with her into hiding, leaving behind everything familiar, or stay in Pinehurst and accept that their connection had been temporary. The goodbye was everything Ryan had feared it would be: final, devastating, and completely inadequate for the emotions it was meant to contain. Victoria pressed her silver bracelet into his palm, the simple piece of jewelry that had become a symbol of her assumed identity. "So you don't forget me," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. Ryan wanted to promise that he'd never forget, that he'd find a way to follow her, that love could overcome the practical realities of their situation. Instead, he kissed her forehead and watched her disappear into the back seat of an unmarked government vehicle. The silence that followed was different from the silence he'd lived with after Emma's death. This was the silence of possibility cut short, of a future that had been within reach before circumstances intervened. 3 weeks later, Ryan's accident at the golf course was the kind of workplace incident that normally would have been forgotten within days. A faulty sprinkler head had exploded under pressure, sending him to the hospital with a concussion and a collection of cuts that required more stitches than he cared to count. But as he lay in the hospital bed, drifting in and out of consciousness, his fevered mind kept returning to Victoria's name. The nurses assumed he was calling for his wife, and he didn't correct them. Lily's visits were the bright spots in his recovery, her 9-year-old chatter filling the sterile room with the kind of normalcy he'd forgotten he was capable of experiencing. It was during one of these visits that the FBI agent appeared in the doorway, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere from casual to significant. "Mr. O'Sullivan," Agent Martinez said, settling into the visitor's chair with the casual confidence of someone bearing unexpected news, "I wanted to update you on Ms. Sterling's situation." Ryan's heart rate monitor betrayed his emotional response before he could control his expression. "She's not in witness protection," Martinez continued, his voice carrying a note of professional confusion. "She refused the program, said she had something more important to take care of." The implications of this revelation were staggering. Victoria had chosen to remain vulnerable rather than disappear completely, and Ryan couldn't understand why anyone would make such a seemingly irrational decision. "Where is she?" he asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Martinez's slight smile suggested that some questions were better discovered than answered. The truth revealed itself in pieces over the following days, each revelation more surprising than the last. The trailer park where Ryan and Lily lived had been quietly purchased by a shell company that traced back to a charitable foundation. The foundation's mission statement focused on providing stable housing for working families, and its anonymous benefactor had specifically targeted the Pinehurst area for development. The community center that had been scheduled for demolition was suddenly saved by a grant from the same foundation, which also funded after-school programs and job training initiatives. Ryan began to notice other changes around town: scholarships for local students, improved facilities at the school, and a general sense that someone with significant resources was investing in the community's future. The pieces of the puzzle were all present, but it wasn't until he saw the familiar figure in the hospital cafeteria that everything clicked into place. Victoria looked different with darker hair and simpler clothes, but her eyes were unmistakably the same. She wore the uniform of a social worker, complete with an identification badge that identified her as Sarah Vincent, Community Outreach Coordinator. "Hello, Ryan," she said, her voice carrying the nervous energy of someone who'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks. "I heard about your accident." The conversation that followed was careful and loaded with subtext. Two people dancing around the obvious while maintaining the fiction of casual acquaintance. Victoria, Sarah, explained that she'd been hired to work with families in the area, helping them navigate various social services and support programs. The job was perfectly legitimate, though funded by the same foundation that had been quietly transforming Pinehurst. "I couldn't leave," she said finally, abandoning the pretense of professional distance. "Not when I'd finally found something worth staying for." The reunion with Lily was everything Ryan had hoped for and more. His daughter's face lit up with genuine joy when she saw Victoria in the hospital room, and the embrace they shared was fierce and immediate. "Miss Victoria," Lily exclaimed, using the name she'd always called her. "I knew you'd come back." The innocent confidence of childhood had somehow seen through the complications that had confused the adults, recognizing a connection that transcended circumstances. Victoria produced a small wrapped package from her purse, which contained a delicate silver bracelet sized for a child's wrist. "I thought you might like to match," she said, showing Lily the identical bracelet on her own wrist. "But you have to promise to take care of it." The symbolism wasn't lost on Ryan, who understood that Victoria was offering more than jewelry. She was offering a permanent place in their lives. The gradual integration of Victoria into their daily routine felt natural, in a way that surprised Ryan. She helped with Lily's homework, shared cooking duties in their small kitchen, and somehow managed to make their trailer feel more like a home than a temporary shelter. The work clothes she now wore suited her better than the expensive business attire ever had, and she seemed to find genuine satisfaction in the unglamorous work of community service. The golf course promoted Ryan to head groundskeeper, a position that came with better pay and a measure of respect from the staff. The country club members still looked through him, but their indifference no longer stung the way it once had. He'd found something more valuable than their approval. He'd found a purpose that extended beyond mere survival. The community began to notice the changes in ways that went beyond improved facilities and new programs. Ryan and Victoria became a familiar sight around town, working together on various projects and supporting each other through the mundane challenges of daily life. Lily thrived in the stable environment they'd created, her grades improving and her confidence growing as she realized that her family was different, but not less than others. The gossip about the mysterious benefactor who'd transformed Pinehurst gradually faded, as people became accustomed to their improved circumstances. Only Ryan knew the truth about the foundation's origins, and he found himself both proud of Victoria's generosity and concerned about the sustainability of their situation. The final piece of their puzzle fell into place on a crisp autumn morning, when Victoria showed Ryan the legal documents that would change everything. She'd been working with attorneys to establish a permanent trust fund that would continue supporting Pinehurst's development long after her initial investment had been depleted. More importantly, she'd been quietly working to resolve her legal situation, providing testimony against her family's organization in exchange for immunity and the freedom to live openly. "I don't have to hide anymore," she told him, her voice carrying a note of wonder that suggested she could barely believe it herself. "I can be Sarah Vincent or Victoria Sterling or whoever I choose to be. For the first time in my life, the choice is mine." The proposal came not with expensive rings or elaborate gestures, but with the simple recognition that they'd already become a family in every way that mattered. Ryan asked Victoria to marry him while they were helping Lily with a school project about family trees. The question emerged naturally from a conversation about the future. Victoria's yes was immediate and wholehearted, followed by Lily's enthusiastic approval and a group hug that lasted until they were all laughing through their tears. The wedding was small and private, held in the community center that Victoria's foundation had saved, with Mrs. Chen serving as maid of honor and Lily as flower girl. The ceremony was officiated by the local pastor, who'd watched their relationship develop with the satisfied approval of someone who'd seen genuine love triumph over difficult circumstances. The epilogue of their story unfolded in the quiet moments that most people would consider unremarkable. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, Lily's laughter echoing through their small home, and the gradual accumulation of memories that would define their life together. Victoria kept both bracelets, the silver one from her false identity and the gold one that represented her true self, as reminders of the journey that had brought her to this place. Ryan still maintained the golf course, but now he did it with the knowledge that his work had meaning beyond mere employment. The resort members had gradually begun to acknowledge him as a person rather than a fixture, though their recognition mattered less than it once had. He'd found validation in more important places. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Pinehurst golf course as Ryan and Victoria walked hand in hand toward the irrigation system that had brought them together. Lily ran ahead, her school backpack bouncing with each step, already planning her day with the boundless energy of childhood. The scene was peaceful and ordinary, the kind of moment that might seem insignificant to outside observers, but felt profound to those who understood its context. "No regrets?" Victoria asked, echoing a question that had become a running joke between them. Ryan squeezed her hand, feeling the smooth metal of both bracelets against his palm. "Just one," he replied, his voice carrying the warmth of shared history. "That it took us so long to find each other." The kiss they shared was gentle and familiar, witnessed only by the morning mist that had become a symbol of new beginnings in their shared mythology. As they reached the equipment shed where Ryan would begin another day of maintaining the beauty that drew people from around the world to Pinehurst, Victoria paused to watch her husband prepare for work. The man who had once felt invisible now moved with the confidence of someone who knew his worth, and the woman who had once hidden her identity now stood proudly in the morning sunlight. Lily's voice carried across the dewy grass, calling for them to hurry or she'd be late for school, and they quickened their pace to catch up with the future they'd built together. The golf course stretched before them, green and perfect and full of possibilities, while behind them the sun continued its ancient journey across a sky that held no clouds. In the distance, the resort's flag fluttered in the gentle breeze, a symbol of the place where their story had begun and where it would continue to unfold, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time.